The Virginia colony. And so now you can see we have jumped into chapter 2. So now we're going to look at some more permanent settlements done by the English. So we're going to see in 1607, the English try again, and this time in the lower Chesapeake Bay region. And they're going to establish Jamestown, which eventually is going to develop basically into the colony of Virginia. Now, the success of Jamestown and really the success of the Virginia colony is going to be due to one big thing, tobacco and the very good prices from European consumers. Now, early on, we're going to see that Jamestown is established by a joint stock company. I don't go into a lot of details on this. I definitely would recommend reading about it in your book more. But basically, very small description is they would sell shares to investors in the company who would then expect a profit in return to thus raise money for colonization. So Jamestown colony itself is named for the King of England, King James. People would sign up with terms with the company. Initially, when they get it established, I know you're going to be shocked by this, they hunted for gold and the Northwest Passage to Asia. They found disappointment and suffering. They did not find these things. The thing is, where this was established was a very swampy region. The problem with swampy regions is, think like today and even a couple of years ago when everyone was freaking about like Zika virus and stuff in Florida. The whole thing is this, when you're in swampy humid regions, this becomes a breeding area for mosquitoes and parasites who oftentimes carry diseases like malaria. We're also going to see that the colonists are going to not just be affected by disease, but they're going to neglect their own crops and their own food supplies. And in fact, if you're looking at numbers, in January of 1608, only 38 colonists remained. At this point, we get our Disney hero, Captain John Smith, taking leadership, and he would impose military discipline. You don't work, you don't eat. And so this is going to end up reviving the colony, but it does antagonize a lot of the colonists against him. And so he's going to be replaced really quickly when he is hurt in a gunpowder explosion in 1609 and has to return to England. Once again, though, the colony would have problems. New people would arrive basically in Jamestown and the surrounding Virginia colonies just to starve or die of disease. Give me some numbers again so you can see how bad it was. In the fall of 1609, there was 500 colonists. In the spring of 1610, so one winter later, only 60 colonists. Not great odds. Once again, though, they would try the harsh military discipline. They'd have a very strict legal code. It'd be things like the death penalty for trivial offenses like swearing or killing a chicken, things like that. The thing is, this kind of punishment is definitely going to discourage immigration, and they need more colonists to come over. And so they try for more positive inducements. The thing is, initially, a lot of the people that signed up for terms with the company worked for food, but they really wanted land. Remember, land is that tie into prestige and power and political power especially. And so governors began assigning small plots of land for those who finished their terms with the company. And then by 1616, we're going to see the headright system is going to be established here. This basically is that you got 50 acres of land if you pay for your own way to Virginia, and then you would get an additional 50 acres of land for each head that an individual brought with them, thus a headright system. We are going to see some changes, though, in 1619. We're going to see, just like New France, women would be shipped to Virginia to become wives and thus induce men to actually stay there. We see the first Africans in Virginia. If they're slaves or not is very questionable. I'll talk about that much later. We also see the establishment of the first legislative body in English America. This is going to be the House of Burgesses. This is a big deal because what would happen in this legislative body, this political body in America, which is not America yet, it is an English colony, is landowners would elect representatives which would make laws that were subject to the approval of the company. But the reason this is such a big deal is it's starting to establish that precedent for self-government over in the colonies, and we're going to see how that leads to eventually America, breaking away and everything. We also have to look at the Native Americans and conflict with them. The thing is, as Jamestown expands out, this is going to definitely strain the relationship between natives and these colonists. The very much Native American leader of this era was Powhatan. He was over about 30 tribes of about 14,000 people. Well, the thing is, initially when the colonists land and in those first few years, they're clearly destroying themselves without any help from the Native Americans. But even at that point, the colonists are still going to alienate the Native Americans. They would steal corn from the natives. John Smith himself actually held Powhatan's younger brother ransom for corn. As time goes on, though, and Jamestown starts expanding even more so, we're going to see Native Americans are going to attack. They would besiege Jamestown. They'd try to starve the colonists, who would be saved by reinforcements. This warfare really continues on between the natives and the colonists until about 1614, when you get the marriage of John Rolfe to Pocahontas, who, of course, was renamed Rebecca in the Church of England when she was baptized. How much autonomy she had over this decision is very much limited. She did not have a lot of say in this. This really seals the peace between these two groups in 1614. However, she died in 1617. And then Powhatan died in 1618, which means his younger brother, the one that was held ransom for corn, takes over. The thing is, at this point, there's no more ties really between the Native Americans and the colonists. However, it's not until 1622 that we get the attack from the Native Americans. Basically, what would happen is hundreds of Indian men would go into scattered settlements as if they were going to trade with the colonists, and then they would attack the colonists, and they'd kill about 347 people by the end of all this, which was about 1/4 of all of the colonists by that point. Colonists then would take revenge. They would strike out at native villages, kill inhabitants, burn cornfields. When they actually did have peace talks in 1623, the English would serve poisoned wine to the Native Americans, which would kill another 200 natives. This is going to lead to another 9 years of warfare. We see this is really when we get those primary sources of the English treating the Native Americans with the same kind of ferocity that they had done previously in their subjugation of the Irish. And so this is when you see a lot of those comparisons between the Irish and the English. However, it turns out the company was bankrupt, and you get a royal commission that would investigate the colony of Jamestown and everything, and they were shocked to see, well, it turns out a lot more of the colonists had died of starvation and disease than Native American attacks. So in 1624, King James is going to dissolve the company. Virginia is going to become, at that point, a royal company. The King of England is going to basically be able to, with it being a royal company, the king will choose the colony's governor and council and royal advisors and monitor its affairs. So it's not that necessarily separate government anymore. So you can see that. I also have to talk about tobacco really quick here. The thing is, why is tobacco so important? The thing is, a lot of the success of Jamestown depended on having a marketable product that they could make money off of. And they find tobacco really in 1610. The thing is, tobacco initially was expensive, but it sold at very high profits in England. And so basically the residents of Jamestown are going to plant it everywhere. I mean, the streets. The thing is, company officials were very concerned that everyone is depending on this one crop. I mean, they say don't put all your eggs in one basket, and that's basically what they were doing. And so the company officials tried to limit the production of tobacco so that maybe they could diversify out into more different products. But when the company, when we get the end of the company's rule, planting is going to surge, and really tobacco was the crop. everything about Jamestown and the colony of Virginia is going to revolve around tobacco to a certain extent. The thing is, as the English colonists produced more and more tobacco, the prices fell in England because there's more, this is just supply and demand, more is being supplied, but the demand was the same, so the price falls. And so the only way to compensate for this is basically the English colonists would grow even more tobacco. But that means even more is on the market, and with more on the market, the prices fall again, and so then the English colonists would grow even more tobacco, and so you can see how this just keeps going. The thing is, with needing to produce more and more tobacco, this really is going to shape life in Virginia society. People wanted the land that was closest to the rivers because easier to feed, to water your crops, but also it was easier then to get your crop to the market. And if your crop was the fastest to get to the market, you might enjoy even just a small price advantage that could make all the difference. Also, with growing more and more tobacco, people needed more workers. And so they're going to start importing thousands of indentured servants. Indentured servants were contract workers. They had fixed terms of labor, and in return, they had free passage to Virginia. They would be basically paid they would give them food and shelter and clothing and maybe some freedom dues and like corn and clothing, especially at the end of their terms of agreement. Let me explain just how many indentured servants were coming over. Between like 1625 and 1640, it's something like you have 1,000 indentured servants coming to Virginia each year. Some of these might be orphans, some were criminals who chose to be exported over to the colonies rather than, being executed. Most of the time, though, they were just unemployed English civilians that were trying to better themselves. The thing is, these indentured servants, they're not slaves because technically they sign up for a certain amount of terms and everything like that. But these indentured servants are going to die in alarming numbers, partly because of disease. They'd face pretty intolerable circumstances that if they ran away and were caught, a lot of times they'd be punished so severely that they might die from the punishment. Courts also usually favored their masters' authority over servants' rights. And then even if you were a servant that made it through, then you might get your own land and everything, but the land that would be left over at that point would generally be less suitable for tobacco planting and a lot more vulnerable to Indian attacks. Really quick, we're going to jump to something a little bit different. I'm going to read this to you out loud. However, I'm going to ask you to write a thesis statement based off of this source. This is all about practicing this before you get to an essay on a test and stuff. So this is a French Jesuit missionary in 1642. So this is jumping back up to, New France and everything. He says, "To make a Christian out of a barbarian is not the work of a day. A great step is gained when one has learned to know those with whom he has to deal, has penetrated their thoughts, has adapted himself to their language, their customs, and their manner of living, and when necessary has been a barbarian with them in order to win them over to Jesus Christ." So when I'm talking about writing a thesis statement, I'm going to go ahead and ask you a question. You can write a thesis statement based off of this. What do the Jesuits think of the Native Americans, and how do they decide to handle them? Feel free if you just want to answer one of those questions as your thesis. This should be an argument that you would then be able to prove. So what do they think of the Native Americans? How do they decide to handle them? You can go ahead and pause the video if you want to keep this up for a second while you're doing that, but I'm going to go ahead and end it.